Thank you, Eric, for your welcome, and thank you to the leadership of the church for the invitation to come and to share about the work that I'm involved in with Baptist Missions. It's lovely to be back with you in Coleraine. Can I begin by thanking you for your interest in the work of Baptist Missions and your prayerful support for that work, and also your practical support for that work, because without that we wouldn't be able to do what we do when we're out on the field. So thank you so much for your continued support. We have some prayer cards in the foyer. If you would like one, do take one with you as you leave. And also there's some details for anyone who would like to support the mission. Financially, details about the Target 1000 initiative, those are there as well. Perhaps the best way to keep up to date with what's happening in Baptist Missions is to sign up for prayer news. Many of you probably already get it, but if not, you can sign up for that in the foyer as well, and you will receive that every Friday around about 3 o'clock into your email, or it can also be posted out as well. So started back with the mission in November 22, so still finding my feet, relatively new to the mission, just been with the mission over a year. So this is my wife Debbie and myself. Debbie is originally from County Fermanagh, and as some of you might know because of Nigel, we're as a family we came not far from Fermanagh, just inside the Fermanagh, still in County Tyrone, a place called 5 Mile Town. So there's a real sense that going back to Fermanagh, going back to my roots and to where I know. We have 3 children. Here they are. They don't know they're up there at the moment, so we'll not let them stay up there very long. So Peter's the eldest. He's at the back of the screen. Peter's 21. And Ellen's at the front of the screen. She's our middle child. She's 19. And Patrick is keeping the peace between the two. And Patrick is 15. So that's our family. Please pray for us as a family. I would ask you simply to pray that as a family we would follow Jesus. That would be my prayer for our family. As a family we would follow Jesus. And also concerning our family, we're in the throes of packing up to move house. We're still living in the manse at Gortmerrin, where I'd been pastor for the past 15 years. So we're packing up, and we plan to move by the end of February, maybe around about the middle of February. So do pray for us as a family just as we undergo that change, please. The area of interest to myself is the Fermanagh border area, highlighted here in the yellow. Fermanagh is an interesting county. It borders 5 other counties. It borders Tyrone, Donegal, Leitrim, Cavan and Monaghan. So it's somewhat of a gateway to the south. So the highlighted yellow area is the part of the border that I'm currently interested in. Just a few other markers on the map there. You will see the 3 red markers. Those are the 3 existing Baptist churches in County Fermanagh: Stone Park, Enniskillen and Mullaghmeen. And you'll see those churches are quite close together, and they're on the east side of the lake. So we feel there's real opportunity for gospel work and church planting work on the other side of the lake, going towards the border there. So that's why we're focusing on that area at the moment. Just concerning the 3 Baptist churches there in Fermanagh, maybe just mention Stone Park. If you could maybe pray for Pastor Dowds, the pastor of Stone Park. He's been off work for about a month now with chest pains, quite severe chest pains, and he's going to Altnagelvin tomorrow for an angiogram, and hopefully they'll be able to do something for him then. So I know he would really appreciate your prayers. A few other markers on the map as well. You can see that the two blue markers, the one furthest north, that's where Matt and Jules Tuttleby have a little church plant going in Bundoran. And then just south of that, you'll see the blue marker in Manor Hamilton. There's a couple from Sligo Baptist Church, and they're working into Manor Hamilton. I think they've got a shop front there, and I think the long-term plan is to see a church planted there as well. And then the two green markers towards the south of the map, the one further north, that's the new church planted Belturbet, where Joel and Katia Marcus are working, and then south of that is the existing Baptist church in Cavan, where Pastor Watson, Ivan Watson, is the pastor. So when I started with the mission, the mission just said to me, go out and explore the area. That was as specific as they were. So towards the tail end of 22 and all of 23, the mission just, that was my brief, to go out and explore the border region, looking for opportunities for gospel work, and just as a way of determining where the Lord may be leading us to focus going forward. And that has really been the purpose of the past year, to go out to explore the area with a view to just identifying a particular area, and really from this point on think about focusing in on that particular area. So you might ask, well, how do you do that? How do you explore an area like this to see where there are opportunities and where the Lord may be leading you? Well, what I've done is I've been focusing on 3 geographical locations along the border. A little area in South Fermanagh into West Monaghan, so places like Rosslea, Newtown Butler, and then into West Monaghan, the town of Clones. Then moving up to West Fermanagh into East Cavan, a little village of Belcoo, and then just across the bridge into East Cavan to Black Lion, and then up around North Fermanagh on the Donegal border, the town of Beleek and that area. So I've just been routinely visiting these towns and villages, spending time there, doing some gospel work there, just as a way of exploring and seeing where the Lord may want us to focus going forward. And so in order to do that, in order to explore the area, I've been using a number of tools. One thing I've been doing is just investing deliberate time in building relationships with people. I'm a firm believer that if you know someone and if they know you, you're friends with them, you're in a much better place to share the gospel with them. So been investing time just in deliberately building relationships with people. So I go along to the men's shed in Clones, I drop into the cattle mart in Clones there, in and out of cafes and shops, where there are events happening in towns and villages, try to get along to those. Just anywhere that I can rub shoulders with people, get to know people, and they get to know me, I make a deliberate effort to go and just to do that. Another tool that I've been using has been just a routine door-to-door visitation. We've been using the little booklet produced by the mission and the college, 3 Steps to Heaven, the testimony of Niall Wiseman. But leading up to Christmas, we stopped with those and we switched to using the English-Irish calendars. I did this in conjunction with the Stone Park Church, and I think we put out about 1900 calendars in the towns and villages along the border. But as well as that, we put together some of these little border bags of hope. They contained a calendar, a Mark's Gospel or a John's Gospel in English and Irish, a pen, a little text card, and some sweets. I suppose throughout the year, I felt really challenged to reach those people who live in the more remote areas. Very often when we do outreach, we go to the centres of population. So we go to the towns, we go to the villages, we go to those centres of population, but felt really challenged about the people who don't live in those centres of population, the people who live down the narrow roads, those people who live up the long lanes that you think no one lives up. Felt really challenged about those people. Who's going to reach those people who live in the more remote areas? So we used the Border Bags of Hope in that context. So down the narrow roads, up the long lanes, and that was a real blessing just to do that over the Christmas period, to make the effort to do that, and just to see the response from people. Many people, when you give them the little gift bag at Christmas, they were just overwhelmed that you took the time to come down their lane and to give it to them. So that's another tool we've been using, just the routine door-to-door visitation. And then another tool has been street work. This is probably the mainstay of my work at the moment. I go into the towns and villages and I set up a little book table on the street where I have a pavement sign just offering free Bibles and some other literature. I'm not giving out lots of literature. I'm not giving something to everyone who passes me by. I really use it as a focal point. It creates interest, so it does. And that has been a really useful tool. Many people just coming along, stopping, finding out what you're about and engaging in gospel conversation. But it's just been incredible how many people have come to the table and requested a Bible. To have cars pulling up at the curb, putting their window down and asking for a Bible. And you hand the Bible in and then someone else in the car asks for a Bible as well. So that has been a really, really useful tool just to get known in the area. We've also had some events. We had what we called Ever Wonder Nights. We had 4 of these back in June, and we repeated them again in the autumn time. We held these in the Market House in Black Lion, the Community Centre in Belick, and the Cassandra Hand Centre in Clones, and then the Community Centre in Rosslea. We had about between 15 to 25 people at each of these nights. And perhaps the most encouraging one was this particular one here. That was the night in Clones back in October, when 5 local people came in. And what was really interesting was 4 of those people knew each other, but none of them, I think, knew the others were coming until they actually walked in. And those folks were the last to leave at the end of the night. So that was a real encouragement. So those are just some of the tools we've had in the toolbox and pull out and use just to explore where we're working. But let me just take a moment to introduce you to a few folks that I've met along the way. I'm aware we're on live stream, so I'll not give out any names. I'll be discreet. But do take 1 or 2 of these folks to heart and pray for them. These are real people that I believe the Lord has allowed me to meet and engage with and develop friendships with. And I believe for a number of these people, God is working in their lives. And you can be part of that as you pray for them and just ask that God will reveal himself to them and that they would come to saving faith in Jesus Christ. We'll begin in Clones, in West Monaghan. Of all the places where I've been working, Clones is probably the area where I've had the greatest traction and got to know the greatest number of people. But let me just share a few folks with you. I think of the lady I met very recently at the book table on the Diamond there in Clones, with quite a lengthy conversation. But this is a lady who has grown up in a church that doesn't teach the gospel. But this is a lady who is so devout in her own religion. She attends her church every single day in life. She goes to her church every day of the week. So she does. So devout. But as you talk with this lady, you come to realize that hers is a salvation of works, very much so. And you just get the sense that this woman can't stop what she's doing. This woman can't rest. There's no peace here at all. Pray for that lovely little lady who attends her church every single day, that God would reveal to her and help her to understand that Jesus has finished the work. She need only come and accept what he has done for her. I think of another man I've met. He lives just outside of Clones. I met him on the doors about a year ago. But a lovely friendship has developed with this gentleman. I was with him just over a week ago, and he invites me into his home and made me tea. And as we were sitting there in his modest little living room with the door tightly closed, and the heat was blasting, and for the entire duration that I was there, he was smoking one cigarette after another. I lost count how many he smoked while I was there. You come out smelling like an ashtray, so you do. But what a privilege it has been the last two occasions when I visited this gentleman to have been able to pray with him and to see how much he appreciates that. Again, a man who would have been brought up in a church that doesn't teach the gospel. Pray that God would speak into that man's life. The cigarettes, they don't really bother me. I would love him to get off them for his own health's sake, but I can see past that. And here is a needy soul who needs the Lord. Pray for that lovely dear man. I think of another family I've met in Clones, a Syrian family from the city of Aleppo. And what a privilege it has been just to get to know this family, the dad in particular. But just as Christmas, they invited me into their home and made me coffee and just allowed me to share that time with them. Language is a barrier for the adults in the house, but not for the children. Pray that God would just speak into that family and draw them to himself in saving faith. But let's leave Clones. We'll nip across the border just a few miles into this little village of Rosslea. And what an absolute privilege it is to be able to go to Rosslea and set up the book table on the street and to be welcomed, to have someone come down the street and put a cup of coffee into your hand, someone go to the shop and buy you a bar of chocolate. I just think is incredible. I grew up in 5 Mile Town, just over the mountain from Rosslea. We knew Rosslea was over there, but you never went there, so you didn't. But just to be there now and just to have that open door is a wonderful privilege. Let me just mention two people I've met in Rosslea. One gentleman, again, brought up in a church that doesn't teach the truth of the gospel, teaches a works salvation very much. But this man has a real hunger for the Word of God. He loves reading the Scriptures and that which is related to the Scriptures. He's constantly coming to the table asking me, have you got anything new? The last time I met this gentleman, just after Christmas, I stopped with him. I saw him outside his house and stopped with him and we had a short conversation. But as I was leaving, he said to me, you need to hurry up and get your church built. You need to hurry up and get your church built. If it was just as easy as that. And then he put his hand in his pocket and he says, there's £20 towards it. I said, no, it's okay. No, you have to take it. So I said, okay, I'll take it and I'll put it towards literature. That's a man, I don't believe he's saved. But he's telling me I need to hurry up and get my church built. Well, it's not my church, but you know what I mean. Do pray for that dear man. But there's another man I got to know in Rosslea about this time last year, just lives outside the village, up the mountain between Rosslea and 5 Mile Town, a really, really remote area. I got to know him through the men's shed in Clones, and a lovely relationship developed. He was very warm and welcoming into his home. Anytime I visited him, he would make tea and we would eat Jammy Joes together. But just last summer, he was diagnosed with lung cancer and had to commence a cancer treatment and responded really well to that. And it seemed to deal with the lung cancer. But sadly, it spread to his liver. And just after Christmas, he passed away, and I attended his funeral. But, you know, that gentleman reminds me of the urgency of the need. You know, we're called to go and make disciples of all nations. But I'm very conscious there are some people where I'm working, there's some people where you're working, and we may not get the opportunity to see them become mature disciples. We may not get that opportunity. We might only ever get the opportunity to share the gospel with them once. Because that's how it was with this man. I would say I really only got the opportunity to share the gospel in any reasonable, meaningful way with him just once. And that was my final visit to him in the hospital in Enniskillen. That man reminds me of the urgency of the need in this work. Let's leave Rosslea. We'll not go to Newton Butler. Let's nip up the border and we'll come to the Belcoo and Black Lion. Some of you may have been there. You might know that area. The two villages, one in the north, one in the south, and they're just joined by a bridge. But lovely story just about Belcoo. Really, up till a couple of months ago, I found it really slow going in Belcoo. Wasn't getting to know very many people. But the last time I set the table up in Belcoo, within an hour, I had 3 people offer me tea and coffee. And some might say, well, you're meant to be about the gospel, Colin. You're not meant to be about tea and coffee. But it's more than tea and coffee. Those were more than offers of tea and coffee. I saw it in that way. But one of those people encouraged me, really encouraged me, because it was a gentleman, and I set the table up outside his shop. And he had sent someone who worked in the shop out to actually go and buy me a coffee. And I thought, yes, something's happening here. So just pray for that man that sent his colleague out to buy me a coffee. But let's just nip across the bridge into Black Lion. Black Lion is famous for a number of reasons. It's famous because that fancy restaurant, the McNean Bistro, is there. But it's also famous, I think, because Harland and Wolff Harland came from Black Lion. So I'm told by the local historian. Black Lion, lovely little place, but a gentleman I met in Black Lion about a year ago, just going around the doors, and since then his door has been open to me. He says, Colin, my door is always open to you. And anytime I'm there and I call, tea is made and biscuits are brought out. But this is a man with a who loves talking about the life of Christ, loves talking about the life of Christ. So we've spent lots of time talking just about different aspects of the life of Christ. But the last time I was with him, I suggested that we maybe start reading our way through Mark's Gospel. And he's agreed to that. So just pray that as we sit down together in the early springtime and begin just to read our way through Mark's Gospel. Mark's Gospel is a wonderful gospel. You've gone through it yourself. You know how it begins, the beginning of the good news about Jesus Christ. Pray that as we go through Mark's Gospel, that he will indeed discover why it is such wonderful good news. But just mention someone else in Black Lion, a lady, new to Black Lion, just there maybe over a year or so. She's come to the 2 events we had in the market house. This is a woman, I am convinced she has never heard the gospel before, never heard the gospel. She has lived in Australia, she has lived in New Zealand, she has lived in Glasgow and Donegal, a woman in her 70s. But now she's come to Black Lion, and I can't help think that maybe the Lord has brought her there, that she might at last hear the gospel. As I say, she came to the 2 events we had in Black Lion, and since then we've been able to meet up with her. My wife Debbie and I, we met her after Christmas at a local garden centre for coffee. And when we were leaving, she said to us, when's our next night in the market house? So that was really encouraging. Just pray that maybe some of the ladies, you can take this woman to heart. Just pray that God would open her heart to the gospel. But just as we finish off, what about the way ahead? Well, the purpose of this past year has been to just go out and explore and then begin to think about narrowing down to a specific area. And we're at that stage now where we feel we need to narrow down our focus. And at the moment, we're feeling very much that that area of South Fermanagh, so places like Rosslea, Newton Butler, and into West Monaghan, Clones, that's maybe the area that is opening up for us at the moment. So please pray for that the Lord will make that clear and just confirm if that is where he wants our focus to be. I'm going to just hand back to Eric. Thank you. Matthew 14 and reading from verse 13. This is the account of Jesus when Jesus feeds the 5,000. This is the word of the Lord. Now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick. Now when it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the day is now over. Send the crowds away to go into the villages and buy food for themselves." But Jesus said, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." They said to him, "We have only 5 loaves here and 2 fish. And he said, "Bring them here to me." Then he ordered the crowds to sit down in the grass, and taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing. Then he broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples. The disciples gave them to the crowds, and they all ate and were satisfied. They took up 12 baskets full of the broken pieces left over, and those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. Amen, and may God bless his word and speak to us from it this morning. Sometimes when we talk about mission, we talk about the challenge of mission. And that's a good way to talk about mission. That's the right way to talk about mission. Because mission will always be a challenge. And if mission is not a challenge, it's probably not mission. Because mission will always be a challenge. We see in this passage the disciples faced a mission challenge all of their own. The challenge they faced is contained in verse 16, where Jesus says to the disciples concerning this vast crowd of people, at least 5,000, probably a lot more than that. Jesus said to them, "You give them something to eat." That was the mission challenge facing the disciples. They had got to find some way of feeding this hungry crowd. This was a challenge of huge proportions. It was a challenge because of the need. The people were hungry. That made it a challenge. It was a challenge because of the numbers. There were at least 5,000, we know from verse 21, but possibly more. It was a challenge because of the time of the day. We're told there in verse 15 that it was evening. The day was almost over. So the time of the day makes it a challenge. And of course, the resources they have available to them makes it a challenge. What have they got? Well, we know that they've got, from verse 17, 5 loaves and 2 fish. So they've got 5 loaves, they've got 2 fish, there's 12 of them, there's Jesus there as well. That's all they've got. So the resources they have available seem so small compared to the task. And all of that comes together to make this a huge challenge. And all of those things makes mission for me, mission for you, a challenge also. The need is great. The numbers involved, they're endless, aren't they? The time, we believe, the time is well gone. The resources, we always feel we don't have enough resources, not enough people. All of this comes together to make mission a great challenge. But how should we respond? What should our response be to the challenge of mission? Well, we see the way the disciples wanted to respond. They wanted Jesus just to send the crowds away. Let them go and buy their own food. That's what they say to Jesus in verse 15. When it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place. The day is now over. Send the crowds away to go into the villages and buy food for themselves." That's how they want to respond to the challenge. They want to just send the people away, let them buy their own food. Really what they're saying is, these people are not our responsibility. That's how they cope with the challenge. They shirk the responsibility. They try to get out of it that way. And sometimes we do that in mission. We see people, we see the need, we see the numbers, and we think they can't all be our responsibility. But Jesus did say, go into all the world. So we did. But they're also being a bit naive, aren't they? The disciples, they say to Jesus, send the crowds into the villages and let them buy food. Remember, it's evening. Remember, they're in a desolate place. Even if they go into the villages, is there going to be enough food in the villages to feed this lot? Are the takeaways in the villages going to have enough in their stores to feed this lot? I think they're being a bit naive, and sometimes we can be naive in mission. So we can, to get us off the hook, so that we don't have to do it. Sometimes we say, well, the internet, that's it, the internet, that gets us off the hook. People will hear the gospel on the internet, and praise God they can. There's some garbage there as well. That's how the disciples wanted to respond. They wanted to just shirk their responsibility, send them away, let them buy their own. But Jesus doesn't give in. Jesus challenges the disciples to face up to the challenge. He says to them in verse 16, no, I'm not going to do that. They don't need to go away. You give them something to eat. What a challenge. He doesn't give in. He doesn't back down. He says, no, we're not going to do that. You give them something to eat. Really what Jesus is saying to the disciples here, men, fellas, these people are your responsibility. They're your responsibility. You got to give them something to eat. Jesus wants the disciples to feel the weight of this responsibility. Notice he doesn't say to them, okay, we'll send half of them away and we'll feed the rest. No, he doesn't do that. He says, we're not going to send any away. You're going to feed them. He challenges them to face up to the challenge of the mission set in front of them. He wants them to feel the weight of that responsibility. He wants the disciples to see these people as their responsibility. And I believe it's the same for us. Wherever we see people, we need to see them as our responsibility. So we do. But also, when there's encouragement here for the disciples as well. When Jesus said to them in verse 16, no, we're not going to send them away. You give them something to eat. Jesus obviously thought, we can do this. This is possible. I mean, Jesus wouldn't have asked the disciples to feed them if he thought they couldn't, or there was going to be no way. The fact he says, no, we're not sending them away. You're going to give them something to eat. Jesus reckons this mission is possible. And it's the same with our mission. Sometimes we look at it and we think it's impossible, but as far as Jesus is concerned, it's going to get done. This is a mission that's possible. It's going to get done. And the mission was possible for the disciples, wasn't it? It's wonderful to contrast, if you like, verses 15 to 17 with verse 20. In verses 15 to 17, the disciples can't see any way around this. They've just got 5 loaves and 2 fish. They don't know what they're going to do. They see no way. And then in verse 20 it says, they all ate and were satisfied. That which was impossible becomes possible. I want you to remember that this morning as we think about mission, as you think about mission in Coleraine and the surrounding area. I want you to think about that it's possible. Why was it possible? Let me suggest a few reasons why it became possible. The first reason is the disciples accepted the responsibility in its totality. I believe the disciples came to that point, right? Jesus isn't sending them away, so we've got to face this. They accept the responsibility in its totality. We need to do the same. We need to recognize Jesus says, go into all the world. Jesus says, go into the streets and the lanes, go to the hedges, go to the highways, wherever there are people. Those people are your responsibility. They accept the challenge in its totality. And then they do something really important. They admit their weakness to Jesus. They say to Jesus in verse 17, basically, we can't do this. You're going to have to help us. They say to Jesus, we've only got 5 loaves and 2 fish. They're admitting their weakness. They're admitting they're not up to this. We've only got 5 loaves and 2 fish, Jesus. They're admitting their weakness. And I think that's where it all changes in mission. When we admit our weakness, sometimes we pretend we can do it. We can't do it. We're not up to it. Baptist Missions isn't up to it. Coleraine Baptist isn't up to it. This great task of mission. Let's not pretend we are. Let's not be afraid to admit our weakness. Let not be afraid to acknowledge to Jesus our weakness. Because you see, whenever they admit their weakness, what they're doing is they're turning to Jesus. They're turning to Jesus. And that's what happens when we admit our weakness. We automatically turn to Jesus. We have to. We haven't got the resources ourselves. When we admit our weakness, we turn to Him. That's where it changes. When we turn to Him. And notice what Jesus said to them in verse 18. He said, bring them here to me. Give me the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. Almost seems pointless, doesn't it? Almost seems foolish. Considering the crowd and the need to bring Jesus 5 loaves and 2 fish and say, there you are, Jesus. You see what they're doing? They're giving Jesus what they had. That's what they're doing. They're giving Jesus what they had. And that's what we need to do in mission. We mustn't pretend we can do it. We acknowledge our weakness and we come to Jesus and we say, Jesus, we want to do something, Jesus. We want to be faithful in mission, Jesus. But here's all we've got. We've got so many members in our church. We've got so much money. We've got a building. Whatever we've got, we bring it to Him. And we'll say, Jesus, could you do anything with it? What could you do with it? And we give it to Him. They did that here because we're told there in verse 19 that Jesus took the bread and the fish and he said a blessing. So they brought it to Him. But look what happens when they do that. When they bring to Him what they've got, and it's pathetic, Jesus gives them back what they need to finish the mission. Jesus gives them back all they need to finish the mission, all they need to feed that multitude before them. Verse 19, let's read from there. Then He ordered the crowds to sit down in the grass, and taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, He looked up to heaven and said a blessing. Then He broke the loaves, gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowd, and they all ate and were satisfied, and they took up 12 baskets full of the broken pieces left over. So they bring to Jesus the little that they have, and He gives them back all they need for the mission and all they need to finish the mission. And that's how it's meant to work. That's how it's meant to work. All that we need for the mission, we find it in Him. And as I think of Jesus giving the bread and the fish to the disciples and then them going out and distributing it, I don't think they would have been able to carry at one go all that food to feed all those people. So I think they came up to Jesus and He gave them as much as they could carry. They took it out, they distributed it, and then they kept coming. They came back for more, and this kept going on and on and on until the crowd was fed. What a lovely picture of how to do mission. We come to Jesus with what we've got. We say, there you are, Jesus. We're looking to you. And then we go out from Jesus and we do mission. And then we come back to Him for more. And we come back for more. And we go out. And it just keeps going on like that. That's how you do mission. This I finish, folks. The 12 baskets left over have always intrigued me. always intrigued me, find it so interesting. We're told there was 12 baskets left over there in verse 20. You know, when it comes to mission, sometimes we bite off what we know we can chew. We bite off what we're comfortable with. We attempt what we know we can accomplish. But the 12 baskets here reminds me that the disciples could have even fed more people that day. They could have even fed more. And those 12 baskets reminds me that, Colin, sometimes maybe you need to be a wee bit more courageous. You need to be a wee bit more adventurous in mission. Colin, you maybe need to go out a bit further and wider. Because my resources, they're endless. Maybe the Lord this morning is challenging my heart and maybe challenging your heart as well, challenge you as a church. When it comes to mission, don't just do what you're comfortable with. Remember the 12 baskets. May they encourage you to be even more courageous, more adventurous, more ambitious for the gospel, remembering that he is able to meet all our needs as we seek to fulfill his great commission and to go into all the world and preach the gospel. I'm going to sing just before we come around the Lord's table this lovely hymn, the Compassion Hymn. I was just reading through it, and some wonderful words here. In verse 4, it says, "Each day we live an offering of praise as we show to the world your compassion. How beautiful the feet that carry this gospel of peace to the fields of injustice and the valleys of need." Let's be those who carry this gospel to the valleys of needs. We'll stand together as we sing, and then Eric will lead us around communion. Thank you.